We've got a special show on a year of Donald Trump coming up in a moment. Do stay with us here on BBC News. I'm Geetha Gurumuthy. Thanks for being with us.
Hello from Washington, I'm Sumi Somaskanda.
And I'm Caitriona Perry. 1 year on from President Trump's inauguration, we take stock of a presidency that has reshaped US politics and the world. Donald Trump returned to the White House promising a new direction, and over the past year, his administration has moved decisively to reshape policy.
Supporters say this is the fast, forceful, and unapologetic leadership they voted for, while critics argue the country is more polarized and less stable. In this BBC News special, we'll examine the defining moments of President Trump's second term so far.
We'll hear from our correspondents around the world, from Europe to conflict zones like Ukraine and the Middle East, to Latin America, here in the US and in China.
We'll speak to Republicans and Democrats and hear from Americans in key states about the seismic policy shifts of the past year and the choices now facing the White House.
We'll be spending the next 2 hours looking at all sides of the story, getting a broad range of views on the impact of President Trump's first year back in office. But first, here's a reminder of how President Trump sees his achievements over the past 12 months.
So help me God. So help me God. Congratulations, Mr. President.
The golden age of America begins right now.
The first item that President Trump is signing is the rescission of 78 Biden-era executive
My
actions.
fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day. Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years, but it is not going to happen anymore. We're going to break it down into 3, 4, 5, 6, or even 7 bills. And I said, let's make it one big, beautiful bill. I declared a national emergency on our southern border. As a result, illegal border crossings last month were by far the lowest ever recorded, ever. They go after our ICE people, who are great patriots and tough job too, but they love it. They love it because they're cleaning up our country. To bring outlaw dictator Nicolas Maduro to justice. We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning.
I know.
But we had an extremely productive meeting and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. I get along very well with President Putin, but I'm very disappointed in him. I get along very well with President Xi. I'm going to go over to China in April, but I don't want them as a neighbor in Greenland. Not going to happen. What I'd like to see, Canada become our 51st state. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it. This is not only the end of a war, this is the end of the age of terror and death. And by the way, to all Iranian patriots, keep protesting and save the name of the killers. The golden age of America has only just begun. It will be like nothing that has ever been seen before.
Hello and welcome to this special program. We just saw a little clip there of President Trump reliving the year in his moments. Marking this first anniversary, the president is currently speaking in the White House briefing room. He's talking about his record on the economy and immigration. You can see some live pictures of him there. We're going to keep an eye on that. When it gets to a questions and answers session, we will bring that to you live.
Yeah. In the meantime, let's take a look at where President Trump stands in the latest polling 1 year in. Affordability is a top issue for voters. 74% of people say the Trump administration is not focusing enough on lowering prices.
On foreign policy, 53% of Americans said the Trump administration's focus on events overseas is too much. And new polling today from The Economist suggests that the president's net approval rating has dropped. 37% approve of his performance and 56% disapprove of the job that he's doing.
So we're going to keep our eye, of course, on the White House and see when President Trump might start taking questions. But with us throughout their special coverage today is our panel. We have with us Rodney Davis, former Republican congressman from Illinois, and Val Demings, former Democratic congresswoman from Florida. Welcome to you both. It's great to have you with us as we mark this 1 year special. And Rodney, I'll start with you. What to you is the standout moment from President Trump's first year back in office?
Oh, it has to be helping to broker the end of the conflict in the Gaza Strip. That has paid dividends throughout an entire region, but also throughout the world. That showed that the president wanted to go beyond what his MAGA base wanted him to do. He was willing to separate himself from that base who doesn't want foreign intervention in many cases, to say, when America leads, the world is a better place. And as you saw from his address in Israel, he was well received by the Israelis too.
Val, for you, what's been the standout moment of President Trump's first year in office?
Well, let me say, in terms of the Gaza Strip, there were a lot of promises made there. There was supposed to be a peace deal there, but we do know that there's still a lot of instability. There's still a lot of human suffering. There's a lack of food, lack of medicine, lack of access to those life-saving commodities. And so things are not as the president promised there. But let me say this, in terms of domestic issues, I think the polling clearly demonstrates that the overwhelming majority of Americans are still concerned about the cost of goods and services. The president said that the affordability thing was a hoax. And then he went on to say he needed to work on affordability. People are still paying too much at the grocery stores, too much at the gas pumps. Yes, we've seen those prices go down some, but not enough. The American people, that is their number one priority. President said that he would get out of the forever wars, but it seems like there's more instability around the world than ever before. And so promises made, but promises not kept. There's still a lot of work for the president to do.
Yes, certainly. We'll be talking about that work on the domestic side and on the foreign policy side as well, because that has been a big aspect of what we're looking at, of course, in this first year. So maybe we can take a closer look at that now as well, because the U.S. president's America First agenda has been a part of what he has talked about this year, indeed, Caitriona, and it's something that we've seen defined in many ways. And that foreign policy has upended decades of U.S. diplomacy, with Washington acting at speed and often alone.
Indeed, President Trump says he has ended wars, as you've both alluded to there, dismantled Iran's nuclear threat, forced dramatic change across the Middle East, Europe, and in Latin America. So let's have a little look back at some of what he's done. Here's Roz Atkins now.
Trump's new administration had this message for the world.
In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town.
That's meant a new, sometimes unexpected, approach to foreign policy. In Gaza, a ceasefire arrived, and Trump played an important role. He called the deal historic. World leaders gathered. And while this wasn't a peace deal, the fighting has largely stopped. The same hasn't happened in Ukraine.
I will end that war in one day. It'll take 24 hours.
He didn't do that. Not in a day, nor in a year. In February, Zelensky came here to the White House. A handshake was followed by the Oval Office. And this.
Good position. You don't have the cards right now. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people.
There would be more talks on Ukraine in Washington, Moscow, Alaska, and Mar-a-Lago. But there was no deal, and much more uncertainty about US support. Trump also warned NATO members, if they don't pay, I'm not going to defend them. These countries are increasing their defense spending. To a degree, this is a Trump effect. And the EU acknowledges something more fundamental is happening too. Europe must be ready to take responsibility for its own security, it says. A new US national security strategy underlined a new critical tone, saying Europe faces civilizational erasure because of migration, and that the EU is undermining political liberty and sovereignty. Then there's Venezuela. President Nicolas Maduro was seized.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition.
And the administration's message was clear. To paraphrase, fool around and find out. This is our hemisphere, the White House declared, while asserting that Greenland should be part of the US. The use of US power to maintain US power. In Trump's foreign policy, all other considerations are secondary.
So let's bring Rodney and Val back in on this, those big foreign policy moments of President Trump's first year. Rodney, how do you describe what America First now means? Because we've seen very different approaches from President Trump on very different foreign policy fronts.
Yeah, for the last few years, America First meant focusing just on America, closing the border. I mean, the world witnessed the border surge during the Biden administration, where millions of people were coming across the border really undeterred. And the president, faster than anyone ever thought would have happened, stopped that.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Rodney. I think President Trump is now taking questions we anticipate he's going to take questions on foreign policy. So let's listen in.
Another one, because
Are you from Brazil?
Yes. The EU and Mercosur just signed a trade agreement this weekend, which is going to be the biggest trade zone, free zone in the world. Right. At the moment, you are talking a lot about tariffs. What is your reaction to that? So, two questions.
Well, I just think this. I think we have trade like we've never had before. We're doing better in trade than we ever have before. We're not being ripped off by every country in the world like we were before. We're doing numbers that nobody's ever thought possible. We're the richest we ever were. It's because of tariffs and the proper use of tariffs. And we're also the most secure. As an example, Iceland, without tariffs, they wouldn't even be talking to us about it. So we'll see what happens. I think it's going to work out quite well. Yeah, right behind.
Thank you, Mr. President. How would you characterize your relationship with Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer right now? And have you spoken to them since your Truth Social post?
No, I haven't, but I think I get along very well with them. I mean, they always treat me well. They get a little bit rough when they're, when I'm not around. But when I'm around, they treat me very nicely. And, I like both of them. They're both liberal. They've got to straighten out their countries. You can't, London is having a lot of problems. And if you look at Paris, got a lot of problems. They have two problems, immigration and energy. They got to stop with the windmills, and they got to go back like UK has an unbelievable asset called the North Sea. Norway uses it, makes a fortune. They have a better section of it, and they don't do it. They could straighten out their countries, and it would be good. But I get along very well with them.
You told Norway's prime minister.
Are you from Norway?
No.
You look like you would be from Norway. She looks like she's from Norway. Go ahead.
You told Norway's prime minister that you not winning the Nobel Peace Prize made you feel less obligated to think purely of peace.
Well, I lost a lot of respect for Norway. And I believe very strongly that Norway controls the Nobel Prize. But you have to understand, I settled 8 wars. I've had every one of those wars, every participant wrote, I didn't ask him to do it. They sent in strong they make recommendations for that. But I settled 8 wars. No president's probably ever settled 1 war. I don't know, think of it. I did 8. The reason I do it is because it's easy for me to do. And I didn't do it for a Nobel Prize. I did it because I'm saving a lot of lives. I'm trying to settle the final one. I'm trying to do Russia-Ukraine. And when Russia's ready, Ukraine's not. When Ukraine's ready, Russia's not. But they're losing 25,000 people a month on average. And I'm trying to get that one done. But no, I feel that Norway has tremendous control over who gets the Nobel Prize, despite what they say.
How far are you willing to go to acquire Greenland?
You'll find out.
Mr. President, Kevin Hassett has said that those $2,000 tariff rebate checks would be up to Congress to decide whether or not to disperse that. Do you agree with Kevin Hassett on that, or do you think you can do that unilaterally?
No, I don't think we would have to go the Congress route, but we'll find out. The reason we're even talking about it is that we have so much money coming in from tariffs that we'll be able to issue at least a $2,000 dividend and also pay down debt for the country. But we'd do a $2,000 dividend to the people of our country. Would probably set a limit of, income limit where it made sense. But we will be able to make a very substantial dividend to the people of our country. I believe we can do that without Congress.
last night on Truth Social, you said that the British plan to hand the base of Diego Garcia over to Mauritius and then rent it back was an act of great stupidity. Previously, you backed that deal. Is it now your position that the deal should not go ahead?
I think that they, when they originally were going to do it, they were talking about doing some concept of ownership. But now they're looking to essentially just do a lease and sell it. And I'm against that. It's a reasonably nothing like Greenland, but it's a reasonably important area of the globe. Not to anywhere near Greenland, but I think they should keep it. I don't know why they're doing it. Do they need money?
Mr. President, with your support to the Syrian government, most probably you avoided another civil war and a bloodshed in Syria, especially after the fall of the regime.
I did a good job.
And, the Syrian government, the last 2 weeks, had to use some force to implement its force on specific areas. And
well,
with
to keep the prisoners, the terrorist prisoners, which are some of the worst in the world, at bay, so they were able to keep that. He's working very hard. The president of Syria is working very, very hard. Strong guy, tough guy, pretty rough resume, but you're not going to put a choir boy in there and get the job done. I spoke with him yesterday because we were talking about the prisons and what was going on. We have some of the worst terrorists in the world in those prisons, and he's watching them.
All Syria.
Mr. President, Gavin Newsom is going to be at Davos if he's not already there. You're probably going to run into him. I presume that this is for him to raise his platform for 2028, but what do you anticipate his foreign policy platform is going to be?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that he's going to be the nominee. I know this. I had a very good relationship with Gavin Newsom when we were, in office together. I was president. He was the governor of California. We had he would talk about it often, and somewhere we just went astray. I just hate the way California is being run. We actually have people leaving. It's never happened before, but I hate the way it's being run. He and I had a very good relationship, really close to the word exceptional, but now we seem not to.
You spoke earlier. Mr. President, you've been hearing from allies.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Trump. Cara Castronova from Lindell TV, and you spoke earlier about the 2020 election. Now that Maduro is in U.S. custody and he was criminally charged, has any more information emerged that you could share with us regarding Venezuelan election software and Venezuelan ties to tampering with the 2020 election? And would you consider speaking to Maduro personally in prison in New York to get some answers on Venezuela's involvement with the 2020 election?
No, I don't think I would be doing that. I think my lawyers would be very unhappy if I did that. Yeah, they've learned some things. Please.
What happens to the tariff threat to Greenland if the Supreme Court comes out and rules against you on the tariffs? And
well, I'll have to use something else. I mean, look,
are you willing to use force?
Take a look at the word license. Take a look at other things. I mean, we have other alternatives. But what we're doing now is the best, the strongest, the fastest, the easiest, the least complicated.
Sir, if you move ahead with the Greenland-related tariffs on Europe, you secured almost $1 trillion of commitments from them to invest in the United States. Does that go kaput out the window if that happens?
I doubt it. Look, they need that agreement very badly with us. They really do. They fought very hard to get it. So I doubt that. But we'll see what happens. We have a lot of meetings scheduled on Greenland. I'm leaving tonight, as you know, for Davos. And we have a lot of meetings scheduled on Greenland. And I think things are going to work out pretty well, actually.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will you still go to Paris for the G7 emergency meeting as offered by President Macron?
No, I wouldn't do that. No. Because, Emmanuel's not going to be there very long. And, there's no longevity there. He's a friend of mine. He's a nice guy. I like Macron, but he's not going to be there very much longer, as you know. And I think I have meetings with the people that are directly involved, not some of the people you're talking about.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. President.
I've never seen this room like this. Is this a celebration of the first year? Yes. Have you ever seen it? I've never seen this many.
I hope we have a very good. I hope we have a very good structural floor. You know, this used to be a swimming pool. You're sitting over a swimming pool. I could see that happening. But we need a good structure here, don't we? Huh? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Happy 1 year anniversary.
Thank you.
And my question is on Syria. The Kurds, as the most loyal U.S. partners, facing attacks by some Syrian elements within the Syrian government. Will you do to ensure the Kurdish rights protected and their effective forces against terrorism in Rojava, Syria continue, as the Kurdish see you as a president does not abandon his allies?
Well, I like the Kurds, but just so you understand, the Kurds were paid tremendous amounts of money, were given oil and other things, so they were doing it for themselves, more so than they were doing it for us. But we got along with the Kurds, and we are trying to protect the Kurds. That's correct.
Ahead of your speech in Davos, can you give us a preview of what we can expect as far as laying out the plans for Americans to be able to buy homes?
I think more than anything else, what I'm going to be speaking about is the tremendous success that we've had in 1 year. I didn't think we could do it this fast. Think of it, it's just now 12 months, and I say it often, we have the most successful country in the world. We have the hottest country anywhere in the world by far. And this country would have been absolutely stone cold dead. And I'm going to be talking about it. I'm going to be, because, a lot of them could use some of the advice as to what we did. They need energy. You take a look at energy policy, they're going to destroy themselves with what they're doing with the windmills and all the nonsense. They need energy help badly, or they're going to be in big trouble, and they need immigration help badly. How much longer do you want to go?
Call it.
I do. I have a very important call with President Erdogan, who I like. One or two more questions. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. During
Go
your
ahead,
second,
please. Go ahead.
One question about the
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The red blouse. Go ahead.
You talked a lot at the beginning of this about the economy, some positive economic indicators. Polling shows a majority of Americans don't feel the economy is doing well. Are you worried you're making the same mistake as President Biden by telling
No, I hope I don't make the same mistake as him. Look, I inherited a terrible. it's a great question because
the same mistake
we
as President Biden by
No,
telling
I hope I don't make the same mistake as him. Look, I inherited a terrible. It's a great question because we inherited a terrible, terrible mess between the border, between all the problems. The whole country was falling apart. And in 12 months, less than 12 months, in 12 months, we have the strongest border we've ever had. We have prices that are much, much lower than they were for the last time. We inherited very high prices. We inherited, remember this, inflation was at a historic high. We had never had inflation like that. They say 48 years, but whether it's 48 years or ever, we had the highest inflation, in my opinion, that we've ever had. Prices, because of that, were very high. I inherited, we brought down eggs immediately. Remember the first news conference, they were screaming at me about eggs. I was in the position for 2 days, and we brought eggs down to lower than what they were before. And by the way, they continue that way. We brought the prices down from when I came into office and from what Biden had, way down. We're going to bring them down further. But the job we did is a miracle. One of the reasons I'm doing this today is to explain. We inherited a mess, and we've made it a beautiful, beautiful picture. Think of gasoline at $1.99 in many states. $1.99 a gallon. It was $4.50, $5, in some cases $6 or $7. We're at $1.99. And energy is so big that with energy, everything else comes down. But the prices are coming way down, and we're going to bring them down further. But we started up here with these guys. We inherited a country that was broken. We inherited a country, and I have a very warm spot. We've done very well with Venezuela. And by the way, that even in itself is going to help us bring down the oil prices. The Venezuelan oil, we've taken 50 million gallons of oil. We've taken 50 million barrels of oil out of Venezuela in the first 4 days. We've got millions of barrels of oil left. We're selling it on the open market. We're bringing down oil prices incredibly. And when they come down, and they've already come down,
Again, $1.99 a gallon for oil. Nobody thought they'd ever see it. All right, one or two more. Go ahead, go. Yes.
President,
Yes.
I want to ask you about Iran. Is the military option still on the table? And can you assure us that the killing in Iran has stopped? And when regard to the Peace Council, which members have to pay $1
So with
billion?
Iran, are you from Iran?
No, I cover the White House.
Where are you from?
I'm Palestinian American.
So with Iran, they were going to hang 837 people. And I let them be known that, and we let them know that if that happens, that will be a very bad day for them. And they decided not to do it. They didn't hang the people. I can't tell you what's going to happen in the future, but supposedly they've taken that off the table. But they were going to, last week, they were going to hang on Thursday or Wednesday. They were going to hang, I think, 837 people. And they didn't hang anybody. So we're just going to have to see what happens with Iran. Is the military option off the table? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President Trump. Thank you, President
Go
Trump.
ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Go ahead, I'll take your question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Go ahead, right here.
Thank you, Mr. President. You promised during your second inaugural to...
We're listening to President Donald Trump taking reporters' questions at the White House press briefing room. We're going to carry on with that here on BBC News, but we say goodbye to our viewers on PBS News. Thank you for joining.
Are people that are living. I saved probably tens of millions of lives in the wars. You know, if you add up the numbers, just if you look at any one of those wars, you're talking about millions of people. You multiply it times 8. But when you look at India and Pakistan, that could have been 10, 15, 20 million people. Could have been more than that. So I saved millions of people. So that to me is the big thing. What?
You suggested a moment ago that perhaps the reason why a positive story about the economy isn't getting through is because of, bad communications people. But are average Americans wrong to still feel high prices? And how much longer does the White House hope that they...
So I think a lot of people are listening to the fake news a little bit. And I'm not blaming anybody. I think I blame ourselves. I think we've done a much better job than we're able to promote. We're not promoting. We're doing a great job, and we're sort of letting the promotion take care of itself. One of the reasons I'm doing this news conference, I think it's important. We have taken a mess and made it really good. It's going to get even better. But if you look at prices from a year or a year and a half ago, you look at the Biden prices, they were way up through the sky. And, they use the word affordability. They just say affordability, and they don't talk about it. They created the affordability problem, and we are solving it. We have solved a lot of it. Again, everybody agrees in this room, I think, gasoline prices have come per gallon way down. When that happens, everything else comes down, but they've come down way down. Many of the groceries have come way down. It's all happening, and it's happening strong. But if you go back a year and a half, 2 years, take a look at those prices and look at the prices now.
Mr. President, on Venezuela, you made a condition.
Where are you from?
I'm from Spain.
Nice place.
Thank you. You made a condition that the political prisoners should be freed. It seems that they are not being as fast as they promised in the beginning. Would that be an issue for the current government?
They've agreed that they're going to let, I guess, most of them out. Or depends on what they did. But they have released a lot of. Released a lot of political prisoners in Venezuela.
Mr. President, earlier on last year, you had indicated that you wanted to take back the Panama Canal. I know we've heard a lot about Greenland. Is that still on the table?
I don't want to tell you that. Sort of. I must say, sort of. That's sort of. Okay, one more. Yes, blonde, blue. Yes, go ahead, ma'am. Go ahead with the blue, holding the computer.
If a consequence of your determination to take control of Greenland is the ultimate breakup of the NATO alliance, is that a price you're willing to pay?
You mean the breakup of it's very interesting.
NATO alliance.
So I think something's going to happen that's going to be very good for everybody. Nobody's done
more for NATO than I have, as I said before, in every way. Getting them to go up to 5% of GDP was something that nobody thought was possible, and pay. At 2%, they weren't paying. At 5%, they are paying. And they're buying a lot of things from us, and they're giving them, I guess, to Ukraine. That's up to them, but they're giving them to whoever they're giving them to, but they're buying a lot. I think that we will work something out where NATO is going to be very happy and where we're going to be very happy. But we need it for security purposes. We need it for national security and even world security. It's very important. How about it?
Thank you very much. First of all, last year you told me that you believe that the reason you won the election is because God put you in this place so that you could save the world. Looking back 1 year, do you feel like God is proud of the effort that you've put in?
I do, actually. I think God is very proud of the job I've done. And that includes for religion. You know, we're protecting a lot of people that are being killed. Christians and Jewish people, and lots of people are being protected by me that wouldn't be protected by another type of president. No, I think a lot of people are very proud of the job we've done. We've had an amazing year. This has been one of the greatest years. Even some people that wouldn't necessarily love me instinctively, they're saying this was an incredible year. We've had an incredible year economically. Look at our border. Our border was a disaster. People poured. It was an invasion into our country of a lot of very bad people. Good people too, but a lot of very bad people from prisons and drug dealers and gangs and horrible people, murderers, thousands and thousands of murderers allowed into our country. And we now have the strongest border of any country. There's probably not a country, I guess North Korea has a pretty strong border, by the way, but there's not a country in the world that has a border like we do. And we took it from the worst border. We had the worst border in the world. Now we have one of the strongest borders in the world. One more question.
Mr. President, you said you're confident something's going to get worked out in Greenland, but Greenlanders have made it clear they don't want to be part of the U.S.
Well,
what gives the U.S. the right to take away that self-determination?
When I speak to them, I'm sure they'll be thrilled.
Mr. President, are you committed to keeping the U.S. in NATO?
I've had such a good relationship. I've made it so much better, so much stronger. It's so good now. NATO is so much stronger now. I don't agree with a lot of the things they've done, but that was done before I got there. I think NATO's been good. Sometimes it's overrated, sometimes it's not. But we have a strong NATO. When I came here, we had a weak NATO. We had a NATO at 2%, and they weren't paying. You had a nothing NATO. NATO's, whether you like it or not, it's only as good as we are. If NATO doesn't have us, NATO is not very strong.
Thank you.
Yes, no, behind you, please.
Thank you, President Trump.
Yes, go ahead.
Greatly appreciate it, sir. We heard a long list of accomplishments from the last year. Could you cherry pick the top three? And then looking forward, what are your three most important priorities in 2026?
So I think the building of a really powerful military has been a great achievement, and that would include the Venezuela thing. That would include the attack on Iran and the wiping out of the nuclear threat. I think that's been really amazing what we've done militarily. I think what we've done in business has been incredible. We have $18 trillion coming in. Plants are being built all over. Thousands of plants are being built all over the country. 18 trillion is a record. No country has ever come anywhere even close to that. I think that's a record. And I think that most favored nations for drugs is something that nobody thought they'd be able to get. Tariffs helped me there because the nations would have never gone along with it if I wasn't able to say, if you don't go along with it, we're going to put a 10 or 15 or 20% tariff on your nation. And they went along. And our drug prices are going to come down at numbers never even seen before, never even thought possible before. So those would be three things. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much.
So we've just been watching President Trump there taking reporters' questions at the Brady briefing room at the White House. In all, he has been speaking there for over an hour, making a number of remarks. before taking those questions, lauding his achievements for the last year, his goals for the time ahead, and also addressing a number of the pressing news issues of the day. And you heard there those last few questions around Greenland and what to do with the NATO alliance. But our panellists, Rodney Davis and Val, are here as well. And Val, just to start with you, he said at one point there, on the economy, we've taken a mess and made it really good, and it's going to get even better. Would you agree with that synopsis?
Well, because you say it does not make it true. And you know, the problem I think that the American people have is that the president may have the best intentions. I'm not really sure why he says some of the things that he says. But overwhelmingly, the American people are saying the economy has not gotten better. That was handed to President Trump from President Biden. That has actually gotten worse. And they're feeling that. We've already talked about the cost of goods and services in the U.S. What about health care? Doubling in some instances, tripling in other instances for over 20 million of the American people. And so the economy is not better. And the president, some of the things that he's focusing on around the world, I think the American people have made clear that they want him to focus on the things that they are dealing with every day, right here in the United States.
Rodney, we heard President Trump even talk about the fact that he felt like he had to communicate this better. He said, maybe I have bad, communications team here that's not doing a good enough job of selling what I've done. Was this an admission that things are perhaps not going as well on the economy, for example, that President Trump professes it to be?
Well, I'll let him decide whether or not that's an admission. But you got to look at the facts. And the facts are gas prices are at their lowest price that we've seen in years. You're seeing the stock market continue to rally. I mean, today was a little less of a rally, but it's still higher than what many economists predicted on Liberation Day. So many American families are not seeing the overarching economic effect that many economists warned would happen. However, I got to agree with Val. Prices could go up. Today, in an Axios story, Amazon said tariffs are starting to raise prices on Amazon. So if consumers continue to see and feel and perceive there's a lack of affordability, remember, when we were sitting in this studio on election night, the number one issue in exit polling that day for Trump-Vance voters was that they believed he could do a better job than the Biden administration on addressing the affordability issue. He is right. He has got to do a better job messaging what has been done, and he has to watch out when those price increases happen and do something about it.
If I may, the president has certainly done a good job at taking care of the top 1% of the richest people in this country, of billionaires. We can certainly look at the stock market, and we should, right? Didn't have a great day today. That's the president's fault by some of his threats with tariffs. But the people who I'm talking about who have to go to work every day, or who have had to go to work every day and are living from paycheck to paycheck, they're not watching the stock market. They're watching the prices at the grocery store and at the gas pumps and how much they have to pay for health care. Those of them who have not lost their health care because of prices. The president, because he said it, does not make it true.
And when he was mentioning there his top three achievements, he mentioned the building of a really powerful military and most favoured nations arrangements for drugs, but he also said how good he is for business, not for consumers, talking about bringing $18 trillion coming in and thousands of plants being built all over the country. I'm not too sure where those thousands of plants are being built. We haven't seen all of those yet. But how do you square what he says he's doing for business with what you're both talking about there and getting that through to consumers?
Well, business means jobs for the American people, jobs that are going to provide health care to families who may not have access to health care. Remember, Obamacare was supposed to solve the health care crisis in this country. And we still have over 50 million Americans that can't afford health care coverage or can't afford to use the coverage that they have. That's not a solution. So building more opportunities for Americans can help the affordability issue. However, we are at a very low unemployment. The economy is doing better than what many Americans thought it would be doing on Liberation Day.
But these manufacturing jobs are not growing, Rodney. They're going in the other direction.
Well, manufacturing jobs are growing in certain portions of the country. However, there are jobs that are available, more jobs available right now than we have people seeking jobs. That is going to be an issue, but it also has raised wages for many of those who are in jobs right now. And President Trump and his administration will take credit for that.
Unemployment rate is actually up under President
In November,
Trump.
it reached the highest level
It's
in 4
actually
years.
up. And manufacturing, one of his promises, boy, would we love to see manufacturing come back to the United States in a great way. Plants have closed since the president has been in office. And so, again, because the president says it, does not make it true. The facts speak for themselves. Things are not better. They're actually getting worse. The president has the power to make things better for the American people if he has the political will to do that.
Well, we're going to talk a bit more about affordability and tariffs a bit later in the program, but we did hear President Trump talk quite a bit there about alliances with Europe, about Greenland, about NATO. So let's talk a bit more about that now.
Exactly. We said at the start of the programme that we had our correspondents all around the world, and indeed we do. Our political editor, Chris Mason, is standing by in Westminster in London for us.
But let's start with Christian Fraser, who is at Davos in Switzerland. We know, of course, the president is heading there. He'll be speaking there. Many people watching closely what he'll say. So, Christian, starting with you, we heard from a number of European leaders, from Canada's leader as well, who were quite frustrated with President Trump and not mincing their words. What did you take away from what you've been hearing there?
Well, I only arrived here just a couple of hours ago ahead of Donald Trump's arrival tomorrow. And on the surface, it all feels very similar to me, very familiar. We're surrounded here by the snow-capped peaks in this exclusive Swiss resort. The private jets are on the runway. There are 3,000 CEOs and business leaders and central bankers here. And tonight, they're all heading off down the main thoroughfare for cocktails and hobnobbing to discuss what they've heard today in the spirit of dialogue, which is the theme of this year's World Economic Forum. And yet, it is vastly different. There has been a rupture, says Mark Carney today, in the rules-based order. Our politics, said Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, is fractured and fractious. And so I think there is a lot of anxiety on the part of the Europeans. They want to know what sort of Donald Trump is going to show up here tomorrow. Because let's face it, he can be, in person, less abrasive than he is on Truth Social. And we've had members of the administration here today, Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, and Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, saying, let's not get this out of proportion. We always find a way through this. They blame the media for some hysteria. Look at the facts, though. The Europeans signed a trade deal in the summer, heading off tariffs, and they thought they were through it, and now we're back to square one. And why? Because the biggest NATO partner is threatening to annex territory of a smaller NATO partner, and also threatening a punishment beating for those European allies who stand by Denmark. And simultaneously, he is inviting to his peace board Lukashenko and the sanctioned, indicted Vladimir Putin to sit on that board, while threatening Emmanuel Macron with 200% tariffs on French champagne and French wine. So you can understand why there is frustration, anger, anxiety on the part of the Europeans. They've been focused today, I think, by Gavin Newsom, the California governor, who is here and has been speaking to correspondents and journalists around Davos. And he said he sees the Europeans on their knees, on their knee pads. It's pathetic, he says. He tells them to get up and to face down Donald Trump. He's a T-Rex, he says, and if you don't face him, then he will devour you.
Okay, thanks, Christian. Chris, if we're talking about fractures in the relationship with Europe, it would seem that the special relationship with the UK is perhaps also not on so steady footing anymore.
It is extraordinary reflecting on the last 24 hours or so, after a year in which the Prime Minister here has put so much store into building a sustainable and as predictable as you can have with Donald Trump relationship with the Trump administration and with the White House. And in many senses, not only is it the central plank of British foreign policy under this government, but has arguably been the greatest achievement, domestic or international, of the relatively new British Prime Minister. Two people of wildly different character and politics who managed to build up until at least the last 24 hours a unlikely but stable and pretty much predictable relationship versus how it might have been. And then this flare up over firstly Greenland, albeit that is a public position, whilst noisier in recent weeks than it had been, that the president has held for some time. But then in particular, that Truth Social post in the last 24 hours in which the president was so outspoken about the British deal over the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean and Diego Garcia, this UK-US military base, hugely strategically significant. The UK government making this argument that handing it back to Mauritius was the right thing to do because of the challenges the UK was facing in the courts, and then leasing back for around about £100 million a year the military base. The Trump administration had previously welcomed it, both the president and indeed the Secretary of State. Now so outspoken, he was a little less outspoken, I thought, the president on this issue in the news conference just now. And the government here in the UK hoping this is an outburst because he's angry about Greenland, the president, rather than some pivot to a much more acerbic position in terms of his outlook on a very different government to his own here in the UK. And this is just year one. There's plenty more years to go.
Indeed, and President Trump saying of that deal, I think they should keep it. I don't know why they're doing it. The UK, do they need the money, he says. Chris Mason and Christian Fraser, thank you both for that.
Okay, let's talk a bit more about those foreign policy priorities that President Trump was discussing. We can speak to Tommy Pigott, the U.S. State Department's principal deputy spokesperson. Tommy, great to have you back with us here on BBC News. And I want to start right with Greenland, because President Trump was fielding questions about Greenland in that press conference. I know you were listening along. And he said, I think something's going to happen that's good for everyone. And he said, NATO is going to be very happy and we will be very happy. Does that mean that President Trump is backing away from his demand that the U.S. own Greenland?
The president's been very clear about the need for the United States to own Greenland. And the president's also done more for NATO than any president in recent history. You saw the 5% commitment made by NATO allies to defense spending. That is about revitalizing that alliance. So the president is clear that the United States owning Greenland is good for Greenlanders, good for NATO, good for the United States to meet the modern threats that we have in the Arctic. And he's also been clear from the beginning of this administration, and it's one of the accomplishments of his leadership, that we've seen that commitment to 5% of GDP defense spending from so many NATO allies.
But at the same time, Denmark, of course, a NATO ally, has said Greenland is not for sale. President Trump has even threatened military action. So what exactly is the president's plan if he says we will be happy and NATO will be happy?
Well, the president, again, is clear that the United States is the only NATO partner that can defend Greenland from the encroachments that we are seeing from some of our adversaries, that can actually make sure that we're able to address the Arctic threat.
If that's the case, if that's a priority, Denmark is part of NATO. The U.S. has military bases on NATO. Why not work with NATO to beef up the presence there if that is the issue?
Well, the president has been clear that we have certain capabilities that come from direct ownership in terms of the Golden Dome, in terms of addressing modern threats in the Arctic. He's been clear laying those out. He's also been clear the fact that the United States is the only NATO partner that can do this, the importance of that ownership. But again, to stress, the United States owning Greenland would benefit the people of Greenland, it would benefit Greenlanders, it would benefit NATO, it would benefit the United States. That's what we're talking about here, addressing modern threats in the Arctic that only the United States is able to do.
President Trump has been threatening European allies with the prospect of tariffs if they don't go along with his plan to own Greenland. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, said today, we do prefer respect to bullies and we prefer rule of law to brutality. Does the U.S. still see these European countries as close allies?
Well, look, part of having alliances in a security framework is to have hard conversations about what addressing 21st century security challenges look like. This reminds me of many of the conversations that happened around those initial calls for increasing defense spending to 5%. Many of the same sort of critics were coming out. And look at what we've been able to achieve since then under President Trump's leadership. Those commitments to increasing that defense spending that is actually about revitalizing that alliance. So we need to have these hard conversations about what a security posture looks like. And the people that you have those hard conversations with are your security partners. This is about addressing modern day threats in the Arctic, and it's something that the president has talked about from the beginning of this administration. He's not afraid to have these conversations, and when you have these conversations, that's the peace through strength that the president is talking about, making sure that we're addressing these threats or keeping problems from becoming problems down the road.
Okay, Tommy Pigott, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Great to speak to you again.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, the other big part of President Trump's foreign policy focus over the last year, of course, has been the Russian invasion in Ukraine. President Trump vowed on the campaign trail that he would end that war on day one, he said, and yet here we are. Our correspondent, Weir Davis, is in Kyiv, and he's looking back at just where things stand 1 year on.
If any world leader has a complicated and testing relationship with Donald Trump, then it is Volodymyr Zelensky. At their now infamous Oval Office meeting in February of last year, the Ukrainian president was publicly harangued and humiliated by Donald Trump and his vice president, J.D. Vance, over complications in peace talks, attempts to reach a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. Some observers described the confrontation as an unprecedented meeting between an American president and a foreign leader. Since then, Volodymyr Zelensky has worked hard to repair the relationship with some success, although he remained frustrated by Donald Trump's reluctance to blame Vladimir Putin for not wanting to sit down and talk peace. But at the end of last year, at the so-called Paris summit, the Ukrainian president did achieve a breakthrough. He did appear to have secured so-called American security guarantees for Ukraine in the event of subsequent Russian aggressive action after a peace deal. Mr. Zelensky even said the 20-point peace plan was 90% achievable. But the new year has come and gone. Ukrainians continue to suffer under increased Russian bombing in this unprecedented cold winter. And as Mr. Trump's attention seemed to be focused elsewhere, and with Vladimir Putin not interested in talking about peace talks, officials here talk privately not of an imminent ceasefire, but of the war continuing well into 2026.
Now, while there's no end in sight, as Weir has just been explaining there, to that war, President Trump does like to claim that he has solved 8 others, although, of course, international experts disagree on many of his summations there. He does include in that list, though, a ceasefire deal in Gaza, the Donald Trump peace plan, which was signed by all of those leaders we remember back in Sharm el-Sheikh in October. He also includes on that list solving the conflict between Iran and Israel from last June. Well, let's get some analysis on the situation in the Middle East in this first year of Donald Trump's second presidency. And we're joined live now by our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette. Lise, first of all, let's have a look at the situation in Iran, because we had that war, 12-day war, as the president calls it, back in June. But also just in the last few days, we've had a very, very hot situation there, which, again, he claims to have intervened in.
Yes, and I should point out that as President Trump, as we've just been seeing, is sort of listing his achievements during his first year in office, it's undeniable that when it comes to regions like the Middle East, he has taken steps and he has had achievements that arguably no other president, certainly no other American president has done. You mentioned the 12-day war between Iran and Israel. President Trump was drawn into that, bombing Iran's nuclear sites, although he had come to power vowing to do a deal with Iran. That was what he said he wanted to do. And then he turned in the other direction. But when Israel wanted to keep bombing, you'll remember that President Trump posted on Truth Social saying, send those bombers back. Stop. I want you to stop right now. And he was able to make Israel stop that war in a way no one could. Now, yet again, President Trump is posting about Iran. We've covered on this program how he repeatedly told the protesters he would come to their rescue, that help was on the way. He warned the Iranian authorities that if they continued to kill protesters, that he would hit them hard. And yet he pulled back from that brink of military action so suddenly last week. We understand that military options are still on the table. But now President Trump while one is never, as been clear tonight, one is never clear on his thinking. What does he say about Iran? He says, I want to win the end game. And what's not clear is, what is the end game in Iran for President Trump? Does he want to do, as he did in Venezuela, just try to remove the leader on the top? Is he really interested in regime change? Will he help the presenters? There is a very anxious pause on the streets of Iran, where the protesters, that roar of calls for change, economic, political, systemic change, have been pulled from the streets by the unprecedented crackdown by Iranian security forces.
And Lise, if we look at the situation in Gaza then, and that ceasefire plan moved to the second phase, we're told by the administration in the last week or so. But again, still a dire humanitarian situation there, still an active conflict zone. And we're seeing the president move now to fill these positions on the Board of Peace.
Yes, you'll remember October the 13th last year when world leaders gathered in Sharm el-Sheikh to celebrate what President Trump heralded as the impossible peace, the biggest peace in the Middle East for 3,000 years. You look at what's happening on the ground in Gaza, where Gazans to a person will say there is no peace. Israel still controls more than 53% of the Gaza Strip. It is still taking military action. The Gazans are living in tents which have been flooded by the rains. There's a spread of disease. UN agencies, humanitarian groups keep saying there's not enough aid. Yes, they have averted the risk of famine, but people are still going hungry. And I have to say that President Trump seems more focused on his so-called Board of Peace than he is really in the conditions on the ground for the people of Gaza. And we now know that Board of Peace, which was meant to be about Gaza, seems to be about much, much more. In fact, as you've covered up again, as you've reported on the program, President Trump is going to be the chairman of it for life. If others want to have permanent membership, they have to pay $1 billion. And it's being seen as President Trump trying to create a mini United Nations as an alternative for the world body that he pours scorn on without stop.
Okay, Lise Doucette there, thank you very much for joining us with that analysis. And indeed, President Trump asked whether his new Board of Peace was replacing the UN, and he said no, he thought the UN should continue.
Well, lots more to talk about on this special coverage we have of 1 year of President Trump back in the Oval Office. We're back in a few minutes to talk about the economy and immigration. Do stay with us here on BBC News. Okay, welcome back to our BBC special programming marking 1 year of President Trump's second term in office.
The president himself marked the anniversary with a long and wide-ranging press conference at the White House, well over an hour, where he touted his record on the economy, immigration, foreign policy, and many other signature policies. Well, let's go live now to our senior North America correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue, who's at the White House, was in there for that press conference. A few that President Trump's greatest hits there, Gary, that we saw, but a big focus on his economic agenda. Asked a lot of questions by reporters, and he seemed to express frustration that his messaging was not connecting on this one.
Yes, I mean, just for the sake of accuracy, I wasn't actually in the room, but I have been here this afternoon. And yeah, the messaging on the economy was a lot about frustration. He believes that a lot of his message isn't getting across about egg prices, about gas prices, about jobs. And he says that that's part of the reason for doing this press conference today. And of course, he has got these plans in hand to say something about housing costs, because that's the other big thing that people are complaining about, the housing costs in the United States. And of course, that's all crucial in this year of the midterm elections, because those sort of domestic issues are likely to be the ones that dominate voters' thinking when it comes to November.
The other signature policy, Gary, and we've been talking about it a lot in recent weeks, particularly in the context of the situation in Minneapolis, but what did he have to say about his immigration policy?
Well, interestingly, they issued this document, these 365 wins, as they put it, in 365 days. Number one on that list was reducing immigration into the negative, net negative migration, as they put it. That's their claim, that that there are now fewer people in the United States as a result of his policies. And we've seen a bit of that at the border, where the numbers being captured at the border, caught at the border, is way, way down. I mean, that is unquestionably something that, you know, may have other factors involved in it in terms of migratory patterns, but part of it, a big part of that probably is Donald Trump's policy. And then also numbers of people leaving the country in the administration's view, nearly 2 million people leaving the United States of their own accord.
Okay, Gary O'Donoghue there for us at the White House. Thank you very much for that.
Well, securing the southern border, as Gary was just discussing, that was one of the central issues of Donald Trump's campaign. He says his approach has worked, and the data shows a sharp drop in crossings, as Ross Atkins explains.
Said he'd seal the southern border of the US, and now he argues he's done that.
And nobody comes, nobody even tries.
That hasn't happened. People are still trying to cross. We've seen social media posts like this from Border Patrol showing people being apprehended after crossing the southern border. But this is happening in much smaller numbers than under President Biden and at historically low levels. The latest figures show 6,478 apprehensions in December at the southwest border, a huge decrease from the same month 1 year earlier under Biden. Early on in Trump's first year, troops were deployed to the border. Asylum was limited. There were expanded powers to arrest and detain suspected illegal migrants, raids in numerous US cities, and deportations, with some sent to the infamous maximum security Secot prison in El Salvador. According to CBS analysis, many sent there did not appear to have criminal convictions. There's also been deportation video content and photo opportunities, as well as legal challenges contesting the administration's actions, some of which were successful. But at the border, the numbers have plummeted, as the president said they would.
All right, well, let's talk a bit now about how all of those numbers are going down with voters. We can go to our correspondent, Claire Richardson, who is in Miami. And Claire, you've been speaking to people there all day, particularly about how immigration and President Trump's immigration policies have been coming across there. Tell us a bit more about what you've been finding.
That's right, Sumi. We've been taking the political temperature here in Miami. We're currently in Little Havana, and I'm actually joined right now by Miguel Granda, the president of the Miami Young Republicans, to talk a little bit about how this past year has been under President Donald Trump. So, Miguel, thank you so much for being with us. I understand you voted for President Trump. Just give us your assessment of how it's been in this year.
This year has been amazing for the individuals that have voted for him, like myself, especially for the Latin community. We've have had presidents for many years and for many generations say that they will tackle the issue of socialism and communism in Latin America. And very recently, we have seen Donald Trump actually take the action that we have been longing for many years. And we hope that he takes that same action against Cuba as well.
And you're of Cuban extraction yourself, right?
Yes.
So what about the issue of immigration? Some of the voters I've been speaking to here have been really afraid of ICE raids. Even people who are here legally themselves see these policies as really terrorizing the community.
Yes. So one of the things that we do through the Miami Young Republicans and through other conservative immigration, policy organizations is that we inform people that if you're coming based off of a policy made through executive order by one president, be aware that that policy can be removed by the incoming president. So immigration, people here in Miami, we know how this goes. We've been dealing with it for 50, 60 years. So it's not something new for our community.
Yeah, it's quite a big Cuban diaspora here in Miami, right? But it's quite different under President Trump, the way that we've seen these this immigration policy enforced. Does anybody that you work with come to you with concerns about this?
At the moment, no concerns. Immigration raids by ICE have been going on for the better part of 20, 30 years. They happened under Obama, they happened under Biden. What we see now is pretty much anything that Trump does just kind of gets exaggerated. The protesters get paid to be there, to disrupt ICE, and them trying to...
Not all the protesters, surely.
Not all the protesters, especially, the ones that maybe do live in the area. But what we see is President Trump enforcing federal law. We don't necessarily have to like it, but he is enforcing federal law.
right, what is your rating of the economy? This is the other big issue that's come up a lot when I've been speaking to voters. Some concern about rising prices, but others saying that it's in a good place for them. It's been an interesting mixed bag speaking to people here.
Yes, so the economy is catching up to the inflation that we have been affected by, especially during COVID. Trump just passed the One Big Beautiful Bill that Congress was able to get on his desk, and it has increased the standard reductions for people adjusted to inflation. So the hit that we're taking through inflation, once we file our taxes, it's not going to be as bad as some economists are saying.
Miguel, thank you so much for speaking with us. Very much appreciate your time. And Sumi, I'll hand it back over to you in the studio. Thanks very much.
Okay, Claire, really interesting perspectives from the ground there in Miami. Of course, a massive Latino diaspora, not just Cuban, but also Venezuelan, with an interesting perspective on immigration policies, how they've been affected.
Indeed. Well, let's chat some more about this. Our panel are still with us here. Rodney Davis, former Republican congressman from Illinois, and Val Demings, former Democratic congresswoman from Florida. We've just been watching some input there from Florida. The statistics are there. The numbers crossing the border are down since President Trump has put all of these various policies into play. But do you think, is he going too far, or is it effective? What's your view?
Well, let me say, I served as a law enforcement officer for 27 years, served as the chief of police. I enforced the laws. Immigration laws are American laws. They should be enforced. But how you do it matters. You know, I think about trying to reduce the violent crime rate when I was a chief in Orlando. Had I not had to follow the law myself, I'm sure my numbers would have been a lot more than they ended up being. And, you know, immigration was President Trump's signature initiative. So the numbers are down, that's a good thing. Why is he underwater in polling? Because of the tactics that he is using. His promise was that he was going after the worst of the worst. I love that. Going after murderers, robbers, rapists, the worst of the worst. That's not what we've seen because of the quotas, which I thought was illegal, by the way, as well as profiling. They're going after any and everybody, including U.S. citizens. And I think the American people, when they see the footage of people being dragged through the streets, American citizens being dragged through the streets, taken out of their homes, a U.S. citizen shot and killed with no investigation. That's why the president's numbers are underwater. So yes, enforce the laws. We are a nation of laws. But how you do it, we are supposed to be the nation that treats people with dignity and respect, regardless of who they are.
President Trump did talk about that shooting actually during his press conference today, and he said it was a tragic incident, and he said, I understand both sides. Interesting to hear that from President Trump. The numbers, Rodney, that Val is referring to, CBS had polling numbers on President Trump on immigration. 58% disapprove of his handling of immigration. 61% say ICE tactics are too tough. Do you think that's what the president is hearing? We're starting to hear some of that from him as well.
Well, I'm sure he's hearing that. However, go back to that graph that we put up just a few minutes ago. It's not dignity and respect to have people come unimpeded into the United States of America and break our laws by crossing the border. That graph showed that up to 150,000 incursions happened per month during the Biden administration, down to less than 10,000 during the same time in the Trump administration. And those were just the ones that were caught. There were many, many more. The president has done what he promised he would do to stop the border incursions. Now, the president is not, and his administration are not going after American citizens. What they're doing is going after
U.S. citizens detained in some of these operations.
And U.S. citizens have been released upon that detainment. However, you look at Secretary Noem's Twitter feed, X feed today. Go look at the criminals that have been arrested during the actions in Minneapolis right now. Many that are protesting in Minneapolis are protesting those arrests. That is not what the American people want. The American people want the laws to be followed. And if you are convicted, if you are on a detainer since 2013 and you have not been deported and you have criminally sexually assaulted an American citizen or anyone for that matter, and going to get those individuals is protested, that is not what the American people support.
We know that the overwhelming majority of people that have been apprehended under President Trump's immigration plan are not rapists and murderers and robbers, the worst of the worst. And tactics do matter. Look, I arrested my share of people. American law enforcement officers, also, when they're making arrests, enforcing the laws, they have to follow the law. And regardless of the crime, we're talking about crossing the border, regardless of the crime, you have to treat people, because that's who we say we are in this nation. You treat them with dignity and respect. That's what separates us as a nation from a lot of our foes around the world. And that's why the president's numbers are underwater, because America, yes, America wants you to enforce the laws, but how we do it matters.
Okay, well, we're going to be talking about law and order and enforcement in just a moment. We do have to take a quick break there, though. Stay with us. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Welcome back to our special coverage. And one of the more dramatic and visible actions of Donald Trump's second term has been the deployment of National Guard troops and federal agents into American cities, prompting protests, clashes, and also legal challenges. Here's Ross Atkins again.
President Trump's been sending troops and federal agents into US cities. The National Guard and the Marines were sent to LA in response to protests over immigration raids. Local police said the protests were largely peaceful. Trump said the troops would address lawlessness. Troops were also sent to Washington
to rescue our nation's capital from crime, bloodshed, bedlam, and squalor, and worse.
Violent crime in DC had been falling for several years before Trump took office. Deployments would follow in Portland and Chicago, though they'd be blocked by legal challenges. Also, the Supreme Court rejected Trump's bid to deploy National Guard troops to the Chicago area. Days later, Trump posted, "We're removing the National Guard from Chicago, Los Angeles and Portland," claiming that crime has been greatly reduced by having these great patriots in those cities, and only by that fact. Troops were never actually allowed to operate in Chicago and Portland. But in all the other places where they were present, preliminary data shows that police recorded violent crime was already falling before Trump deployed the National Guard. But whatever the legality and the impact on crime, using executive orders, Trump has been able to repeatedly deploy troops to US cities. And that has repeatedly provoked political tensions between federal authorities and state and city authorities. That's also been the case as Trump deploys immigration enforcement officers, known as ICE, to multiple states. In Minneapolis, a woman was fatally shot by an ICE agent. The Trump administration says she was a domestic terrorist who deliberately drove at an agent. BBC Verify analysis of a series of videos has found no evidence to prove these claims. The shooting prompted a political furore, as well as protests against ICE. Trump has made the militarization of some US cities a feature of this first year, arguing throughout that it's necessary and that it's working.
Let's get the views of Rodney Davis and Val Demings on this one. And just sticking with Minneapolis, we're facing into a situation where the president has active duty military on standby to go to Minneapolis. The governor has the National Guard on standby to protect the protesters. We could have two branches of the US military facing off against each other here. Rodney, what's your view on that?
Well, I don't think that's going to happen. I certainly wish that Governor Walz and the mayor of Minneapolis would come together and utilize local police to help make sure that federal law enforcement agents, whether or not you agree or disagree with their tactics and the policies and the laws they're enforcing, they deserve to be protected. And that's exactly what the National Guard has done in Los Angeles. That's what the National Guard has been proposed to do in other states, and it needs to happen right now in Minneapolis. And that's where Governor Walz and Mayor Fry are failing.
But in that situation, the local law enforcement, the Minneapolis Police Department, have been told they cannot investigate the shooting of Renee Good, that's going to be a federal investigation.
The Minneapolis Police Department has been told to not protect federal law enforcement. That American presidents have a history.
I don't think they've been given that order to.
They're not doing it, which is why they're not doing that.
An allegation to put out there that we can't
Are they
stand
doing
up
it?
here.
Are they
I'm
doing
not
it?
in Minneapolis. I can't speak to
I'm
that.
not either, but
Neither
we
are you,
see
yeah.
it. But at the same time, American presidents have the authority and have a history of bringing in the National Guard when the governors and local law enforcement don't do the job.
But
Look
this
back
isn't
at
the National Guard in the state of Minneapolis that we're talking about here, because the governor wants the National Guard and has them on standby. This is active duty
The governor
military
should
like
have
we
the
saw in
National
LA.
Guard. The governor should have the National Guard right now on the streets, protecting federal law enforcement officers in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and also protecting American citizens. He's not doing that, and he's failing.
Val, as a former police officer,
God bless the National Guard, because I have certainly been in situations where the governor requested assistance from the National Guard, whether it was for disasters, other situations on the ground. Based on my 27 years, I have never seen a situation where the National Guard was deployed without a request from the governor and coordination with local officials. We're not seeing that in Minneapolis. And so and it's interesting to watch Minneapolis, because it didn't appear to me there was a problem on the ground until ICE got there. And you know what? ICE has a tough job to do as well. This is nothing new. They've been enforcing immigration laws forever. But again, tactics matter. When you lower the age, and I know how critical it is to have the brightest and the best serving in law enforcement roles, think about the authority that they have, the power that they have, the power to take life, power of life and death. When you lower the age and you cut the training in half so you can get ICE officers out on the street faster, who are maybe not trained properly in unfamiliar circumstances and have been driven by quotas, that is a recipe for disaster. Local law enforcement is put in the situation now where there's no coordination, there's no strategy involving ICE, but now they're the ones who should be called on to protect us.
But Val, can I just ask you then about the allegation from the Trump administration that those local officials are actively thwarting immigration enforcement? In fact, the Department of Justice just handed subpoenas today to the mayor of Minneapolis and to the governor, Tim Walz.
It's been very interesting since the beginning when President Trump started deploying the National Guard. He deployed the National Guard. Number one, crime overall across the United States is down. That's what local law enforcement would tell you. Can you get the credit for the hard work they've been doing? But isn't it interesting that in some of the states and cities where crime was the highest, President Trump did not deploy the National Guard. He targeted democratically run cities. And so this is the result of when you play politics, this is the result on the ground that you have. The governor and the mayor have a responsibility to protect the people in their states and in their city. When the governor and the mayor spoke out against ICE, it was because of the chaos that I believe was created by ICE on the ground because of those rogue tactics that they were involved in. Tough job, but if you want to enforce the law, follow the law.
Okay, well, we will talk some more about that in a moment, but before Minneapolis happened in the last few weeks, there was a big focus on the Jeffrey Epstein files, of course, wasn't there? That deadline at the end of December to release those files. And it is a story that has dominated much of President Trump's first year in office. Jeffrey Epstein, of course, the late sex offender, he died in a New York prison in 2019. And in the lead up to last year's election, President Trump and his allies vowed to release the so-called Epstein files. But what's been published so far has only raised more questions. Here's Roz again.
Questions about Jeffrey Epstein have refused to go away. The paedophile died in jail in 2019. He had extensive links with a prince, with politicians, and with Donald Trump. They'd known each other for years before Trump broke off the friendship, he says. Before re-election, Trump said he'd release all files on Epstein. But back in power, he initially resisted. He talked about the Democrats' Jeffrey Epstein hoax, but pressure built, not least from some of his supporters. And there was a change of tack. Trump posted, "I've just signed the bill to release the Epstein files," and claimed,
"I'm all for it."
He hadn't always been, but soon the Department of Justice would publish thousands of documents. Many, though, were heavily redacted, citing privacy and legal concerns. Critics called it Trump's cover-up. And the files keep coming, with more releases planned. But at this stage, less than 1% of files have been released. When he started this process, Trump had this assessment.
But no matter what we give, it's never enough.
Certainly what's been done in this second term hasn't been enough to stop the stories, questions, and criticism.
Okay, back to Val and Rodney on this. And Val, I'll start with you. What President Trump said there is no matter what we release, it's never going to be enough. Do you think that's true?
Well, you know, I investigated cases of rape and sexual assault. The president is the one who said initially that he would release, before his election, the second time, that he would release the Epstein files. He's elected. Suddenly, it's an Epstein file hoax. The court's order that the files are released, I believe it was in the middle of December, was the deadline.
A month ago, yep.
And the president and the Department of Justice have basically stonewalled the release of those files. And now, at the 9th hour, say there are 5.2 million pages that still need to be released. They've had plenty of time. They knew in advance that the files were going to be released. The law was passed. Where are the files? The victims deserve better. The American people deserve better. And you know what? I don't care who is responsible, who joined Epstein in terms of committing sexual battery against the victim. They all should be held accountable.
Rodney, why the hesitancy in releasing these files? Why not have done it months ago without an order like this?
Well, I think it's an unforced error. I mean, this is the end result of many in the MAGA orbit that have really latched on to this Epstein conspiracy for years. They wanted Donald Trump to do what he said he was going to do when he got elected, release the files. Congress had to pass a law to force the administration to do so. And unfortunately, it's becoming more of a burdensome a paperwork burden than what I think anyone would have anticipated on the campaign trail. It's another example of it's easier to campaign than it is to govern. However, what the major impact is going to be, in my opinion, is lower turnout from those Trump-only voters in the midterms that could affect those non-presidential elections, the midterm elections, and affect congressional elections and elections at the state and local level, unless the president forces his folks in the administration to do what they said they were going to do.
But why such hesitancy? I mean, he could have done this. You say unforced error, but he's a master of marketing and messaging himself.
He is, and we'll see if that master approach will be taken to get those files released much more quickly than the bureaucracy would allow under Democratic or Republican presidents before.
Okay. You know, transparency matters.
We're just out of time, Val, so we'll pick this up in just a moment because we have lots more still to talk about, of course. Do stay with us here on BBC News. Hello and welcome back to this special coverage of President Trump's first anniversary of the second term in office. We're talking now about affordability, a key issue, of course, of this presidency. The cost of living has become one of the most stubborn issues facing American households. Inflation is down from its peak, but many Americans still say that costs are biting, and polling suggests that it is hurting overall the president's approval rating. Roz Atkins explains.
The US Treasury has had a new economic plan to implement.
We're bringing our economy back from the brink of ruin.
Under Joe Biden, the US economy was actually growing. Under Trump, that's continued beyond most other Western economies. Some sectors, like tech, have grown substantially. Others, like manufacturing, less so. The president has also wanted to talk about the costs facing consumers.
Our prices are coming down tremendously from the highest prices in the history of our country.
Inflation under Joe Biden wasn't the highest in American history, and prices aren't coming down. Since Trump was elected, consumer prices are up 2.7%, energy costs up 4.2%, groceries up 1.9%, though the much-discussed price of eggs is down. But overall, prices are going up, as they did under Joe Biden. And Trump has acted. The administration has rolled back its tariffs on some food imports, including coffee and cocoa. The US economy is growing, but for some Americans, life is getting more expensive. And as Joe Biden found, that can have political consequences.
Let's talk about that with Democratic Congressman Greg Stanton of Arizona. He serves on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, and also the Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the U.S. and China. Congressman, it's good to see you again. Good to have you on. President Trump, his explanation about the bad polling numbers, if you will, on the economy is that he inherited a mess and he has to clean it up. What's your response to that?
Well, the American people are much smarter than that. In domestic politics, obviously, the president has put into place one of the largest tax increases in American history through tariffs. He has implemented this massive tariff regime against our friends and neighbors, our nearby neighbors in Mexico and Canada, our European friends, our Asian allies as well. And of course, that's a tax on the American people. And the American people are very smart. They don't want that additional tax. It's not needed. It's not desired. And they're responding. On health care, of course, the president has decimated health care for the American people. The Medicaid program, so important to millions and millions of our fellow Americans, has been cut more than ever in history. And of course, the Affordable Care Program. They decided not to keep the programs in place that kept that affordable, and that's hurting the American people. So of course, his poll numbers are going in the down direction here in the United States of America.
At the same time, inflation has not risen with those tariffs, as many economists had predicted. In fact, a lot of the tariffs that President Trump announced on so-called Liberation Day actually are not in effect because he reached trade deals or there are exceptions on certain products. So is President Trump actually achieving what he wanted with these tariffs?
Well, the truth is, we don't know what he wanted. He said he wanted to create more manufacturing jobs in the United States of America. He also said that he wanted to bring countries to their knees so they would negotiate with the United States on improved trade deals. Those are policies at war with themselves. And so it's not actually clear why he's implemented one of the largest tax increases in American history, but not with a truly stated policy goal as a result. What I do know is that he keeps alienating our allies that we desperately need to win this economic competition with China. These massive increased tariffs on Mexico and Canada here in North America, continuing to push, stick a fork in the eye of our European partners, his desire now to essentially blow up NATO and decimate the NATO alliance that has kept this world safe in the post-World War II order. And on issue after issue, he's making America and our allies less safe. So you can tell I'm a pretty harsh critic with his foreign policy and tariff decisions.
As you're on the Foreign Affairs Committee, I will ask you about Greenland. President Trump in the press conference a short while ago said NATO's going to be happy, we'll be very happy. Do you think that means then that we'll see some negotiations on President Trump's ambitions to own Greenland?
Look, here's what I think. I think Denmark understands the strategic importance of Greenland. The United States understand it. We have that shared value. If the United States wants to put more bases on Greenland, I'm sure the people of Denmark and the government of Denmark would be okay with that. If we wanted to reach agreement on exploration, on natural resources in that region, we could reach agreement on that. Instead, the president has decided to threaten to invade Greenland or take military action against our NATO ally. You can't do that. You cannot be allies with a country and a military adversary at the same time. That is why our allies that have been our allies for so many years are questioning whether or not they can rely on the United States of America. We need to be a rock solid partner with our allies. We need to know who our friends are, those that have shared values. And this president is turning all of this on its head. It's why Premier Carney was before Davos today suggesting that we can't have a nostalgic view of our allied relationship. And that's why he's turning more towards China, which is a shocking development here in the United States. We need to be a better partner and stop threatening our own allies.
Congressman Greg Stanton, great to have you back on BBC News. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Well, we are going to talk about affordability and tariffs in just a moment, so do stay with us. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. You're watching BBC News now. President Donald Trump has used tariffs aggressively, as we know, raising costs on imports while claiming that they strengthen America's hand overseas. Some prices have gone up, and many businesses say they are feeling the strain as a result. With tariffs facing a challenge at the Supreme Court and a ruling awaited, Ross Atkins explains just what's at stake.
On Trump's return to power, trade was always a priority. In April, the president declared Liberation Day and revealed a long list of new tariffs, which are taxes on imported goods. To Trump, he was ending an injustice.
Now it's our turn to prosper.
Globalization has radically transformed trade. For decades, ever-increasing amounts of goods have been moving between countries with ever more ease. But to Trump, the US was at a disadvantage, and some countries did have a higher average tariff on imports than America. So he acted. Some of Trump's new tariffs came into effect immediately. Others were delayed. And there were deals with China, the EU, the UK and others, with the new tariffs often reduced, but still higher than before. So far, the new tariffs haven't driven a spike in prices that some warned of. But in November, in an effort to lower prices, a list of tariff exemptions was announced for food products, including coffee. Trump hopes his tariffs will reshape the US economy, in particular manufacturing and agriculture. Already, they've changed the nature of global trade.
Let's talk to a few small business owners now about their understanding and impact of tariffs on their business. We're joined by Craig Reeves. He's owner of CJ Seafood and Sea Eagle Market and Good Eats in Beaufort, South Carolina, and also Mary Taylor, owner of Mary Taylor Wines. Thanks to you both for joining us on BBC News today. Craig, to you first. Tell us a little bit about how the tariffs have impacted your business. You're in favour of them.
Yes, we're in favor of them. The shrimping industry has been getting hammered by imports and unfair trade policies and practices for 20, 30 years. So Trump raising awareness of this and the public to understand the real situation with the domestic seafood industry has been a great thing for us this year.
So when you say the business was being hammered before the tariffs, have you seen an actual financial gain to yourself, be it more customers, more orders, more money coming in since the tariffs came into play?
Yeah, so shrimp prices definitely went up this year, because of these things, and also, public awareness has definitely drove some customers in. Most of them, I would say, not understanding that the stuff they buy in the grocery stores and in the marketplace is imported from India to Ecuador and Thailand and all over the world, and they were, a lot of fraud, a lot of mislabeling. So all those things have kind of brought it to a head, and definitely people are wanting to know where their seafood is coming from. So we've definitely seen an uptick in the past year.
And has it impacted the price of some of the materials that you need to buy? You're on your shrimp boat there talking to us. Have parts for that become more expensive as a result? Things that you might need that aren't available in America?
Yes. The truth of the matter is a lot of the cost of goods have went up, and just like seafood has been imported, we've outsourced so many things in this country. So a lot of our rubber gloves or even the webbing that we use in our nets are, brought in from overseas. Unfortunately, a lot from Southeast Asia and China. So some of those costs definitely have went up, but fuel prices have went down. During the last administration, our fuel prices, quadrupled. We went from $1.50 to over $5 for off-road diesel. So now we're back in the mid 250s. So, it's a give and take. Some things have went up, but other things have went down.
Okay.
Mary, we want to ask you about your business now. Tell us a bit about how the tariffs have impacted you.
Yeah, and I wanted to say hi to Craig because I sell a lot of my wines around Beaufort, South Carolina, among everywhere else.
They go well with shrimp, I'm sure.
So if the tariffs are helping you, Craig, God bless you. For us in the wine business, it's an absolute disaster. Part of the reason is wine is a regulated industry. It's regulated by the states. So the federal government doesn't really understand how the wine business functions in America because after Prohibition, they gave all of the power over this industry to the states. So we already pay tariffs between states. We don't get the Commerce Clause. And the entire industry, including American wine growers, are not happy with this. It's really hurt the U.S. wine industry. If you look at all the articles, the California growers, they're flooded with grapes. They can't sell their products and they're furious. So I'm an importer. I buy wines from places like Bordeaux. I buy a wine, let's say, for €2 in Bordeaux. I sell it to a wholesaler in every single state. In South Carolina, I sell to Grassroots. It's a family-owned business. It's been around for, I think, 40 years now. Every state, it's all small businesses. This is a whole fabric of small companies here. You don't really see an Amazon in the wine business, which is great. The average size is about 4 people. And these companies make so much money off of my €2 Bordeaux. They might, I sell it to them for $4. They sell it to their retailers or restaurants for maybe $8 or $9.
Okay.
And then retail price is about $15 to the consumer.
So Mary, can I just ask you this? I mean, one of the approaches of the Trump administration is to say, look, if you're taxing foreign wines, that should actually boost American wines. People can turn to the products that you have here in the U.S. You mentioned California. You're saying that's not what you're seeing.
No, not at all. I mean, there's no meaningful replacement for wines like Bordeaux. I mean, there are big commercial interests in the U.S., but I don't know about you, but if I go to a restaurant and we have Josh, Mayomi, Oyster Bay, wines like that, Kim Crawford, I'm not going to drink wine. So my check average is going to stay low. No one I know would drink those wines. There's nothing really replaceable at the $15 point. I do think American wine is awesome. I love the wines coming from Virginia, Texas, the Finger Lakes, all of the West Coast. But really, to get into something really good, you're starting at $25, $30 retail. So, what the reality is, Europe's been making a really high quality product for a way lower price. You know, they invented wine. They've been doing it for millennia, as you know.
Right.
And there's just no replacement for it. And it brings so much money and so many jobs to Americans. We can't replace this. There's no meaningful substitute, and we're just going to go out of business. I don't think you want to lose us in our tax revenue. Right. I mean, every single English major in America is in some kind of restaurant or wine job. You know, it feels like.
We'll have to check that statistic, Mary, but it's an interesting one. And I didn't realize
Russian literature. You know,
I didn't realize there are Texas wines either, so I've learned something there. But Mary and Craig, thank you both so much. Really interesting perspectives there.
Absolutely, and just to bring Rodney and Val in, Rodney, doesn't that speak to the blanket nature of President Trump's tariffs plan when you have small business owners feeling the benefit but feeling the pinch as well?
Well, it is the dichotomy based upon the industry, and we'll have to wait to see what the Supreme Court says on the IEEPA tariffs, which could come this week. That could impact some of the proposed tariffs that the Trump administration set forth. And we also have to take a look at what Secretary Bessent said. You know, take a deep breath. I used to get told that during the first Trump administration when I would have reporters come up to me with microphones around the Capitol, like, what about this tweet? And Kevin McCarthy would be like, take a deep breath.
But take a deep breath is hard to say to someone whose business is facing closing doors.
Take a deep breath is hard to say. However, let's also take a deep breath and see what Donald Trump and Republicans have done. There's the most tax certainty for small businesses like those two that we've seen in generations that allows them to plan to keep more of their money into their small businesses. Prices are going down. Look, I want
some prices, not all prices.
Okay, look at your own. Let's look at the economic. Let's look at inflation from your own graphs just a few minutes ago. In 2022, the inflation rate was much, much higher during the Biden administration, according to your own graph. The economy
it has come down since then, but it's not
substantially
down
according
now.
to your own.
We're talking here about a year. We're looking at President Trump's first year.
And I would argue that Republicans and President Trump helped the Biden administration recognize that inflation wasn't just transitory. So they tried to address it, but it didn't affect the Biden-Harris ticket like it should have. And that's what the Trump administration has to be concerned about going forward. However, I also want to say your own graph said that the economy under President Trump, even this year, is still growing, still on an upward trajectory, even though your reporter said, but it's not growing as fast as some Europeans. The facts are the economy is still growing under President Trump. Energy prices are a problem. They're going to be a problem, but that's due to a lot of policies that went to renewable fuels alone.
It is true that the economy did grow. GDP did grow, of course, in third quarter last year. But let's come back to the tariffs and the effect on small businesses, Val.
Let me just say this. The richest people in America are carrying this economy. The spending that you see are by the richest people in this country. It's not being done by people who have to go to work every day. For tariffs, look, we all want fair trade agreements, right? It's a part of American life. It's a part of our positioning in the world. But when tariffs are used for personal grievances, it is the uncertainty that causes, I'm going to say, pain and suffering with the American people. When you say to 8 countries, because they will not succumb to your threat of taking Greenland by force, that you're going to impose 10% tariffs now at February 1st, and then that's going to go up to 25% in June. It is that kind of, and then you may come back and say, oh, well, no, I was just teasing, whatever. It is that kind of uncertainty that just throws America out of order, which throws the world out of order. And so we understand that, you know, tariffs are a necessity, but tariffs are a tax that is passed on to the consumer. And it does affect, as you demonstrated by your 2 small business owners, it does affect different businesses in different ways, and the President of the United States should understand that.
Yeah, we'll talk a bit more in a moment. We want to hear a bit about the global impact of those tariffs and the tariff policies as well. Our China correspondent Laura Bicker has more of the tariff standoff with China and Trump's wider approach to the country.
China will feel pretty confident about the way it's dealt with Donald Trump's first year in office. Firstly, President Xi fought against Donald Trump's trade tariffs, and he will think he's proved to the world, and most importantly America, how reliant they are on Chinese manufacturing and Chinese technology. China produces a third of all the world's goods. It processes 90% of rare earth minerals. These are the minerals needed to make everything from your smartphone to military weapons. And of course, it produces 60 to 80% of solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicles. This, China believes, is leverage, not just in any trade negotiations with the United States, but also as a way of bringing more countries closer to its orbit. There was a slight concern from officials here after the Donald Trump administration took the Venezuelan president. I think there was a feeling that Washington was saying to Beijing, stay out of our backyard. Beijing is unlikely to comply. It has significant investments in the region, around $500 billion worth, for instance, right across that region. So it is unlikely to comply with Washington's orders. And finally, Beijing might use Washington's actions as a way to say to global countries, look, we are a stable, predictable investment partner. It has already worked with the Canadian Prime Minister. Mark Carney was here, the first Canadian leader to visit this country since 2017, and has managed to come to a trade arrangement with China. That is a big snub to America, and China will wonder, will more countries follow?
Laura Bicker there for us in Beijing, and indeed we hear from this administration so often how China weaves through all of its policies, be it national security, defence or the economy. But we're almost at the end of our look at President Trump's first year, and I just want to get Rodney and Val's view on, Rodney, to you first, what is going to be the focus of President Trump in the year ahead?
It's got to be affordability. You've seen from your own graphs and from the facts, the economy under President Trump is continuing to grow. However, if prices go up, like Amazon reported that they are going up because of tariffs today, that will burn in an affordability problem for the president when it comes to electing Republicans in the midterms, the same way it burned in for the Biden administration to lose, even though on Election Day in 2024, inflation for the Biden-Harris team had gone down, but no one believed it.
Val?
I agree. Wow.
Just took finally at the end of 2 hours.
It has to be affordability. And the president does not gain support by telling the American people that they're wrong. People are hurting. They're going to the grocery stores. They're trying to get health care. They're at the gas pumps. They're feeling the crunch. They're looking at their paychecks and feel like there's not enough money there to pay their bills. They're worried about their children's future. So focus on affordability, but also understand America's position in the world. When America's out of order, the world's out of order. An attack against a NATO country is an attack against all NATO countries. So the president has finished his first year, thank goodness. Let's start over, let's reset, and focus on the American people, our position around the world, and do better moving forward.
What do you see the Democrats focusing on, Val, in this year, this 11 months
run-up? It has to be the same thing, really. You know, if we would just understand, regardless of our political parties, the number one priority has to be affordability. You don't gain support by telling the American people that they're wrong. Our position in the world matters. We want to be the leader, act like it. That means protecting our allies and holding our foes accountable.
Rodney, what does President Trump need to do then in the next year or ahead of the midterms to change that mood, that consumer sentiment on affordability?
Well, I think the consumer sentiment is baked in on certain sectors of the economy. Energy prices are going to be tough because a lot of those policies were set by governors in blue states like California, Illinois, and others. So what the president has to do is remind voters what he did to put more money in their pockets with the One Big Beautiful Bill. He needs to remind voters what he's done to grow the economy, continue to grow the economy, and remind voters areas of the economy that he has affected lower prices. And many of those are in the grocery store and at the gas pumps. He's got to continue to focus on this message. And unfortunately, he hasn't done it enough. And I hope he listens to Susie Wiles to make sure that the next few months that happens. Otherwise, I'm afraid if Democrats take over the House, 100 impeachments of Trump and his officials over 2 years. I mean, that might be the over.
What do you think, Val?
Well, I think accountability scares some people. The bottom line is we need accountability. in the White House. We need accountability in Congress. Congress seems to be absent these days. Let's just do the right thing so the American people are the benefactor. Let's stop playing politics. Let's stop being afraid to hold the president and others not doing their job accountable. Let's be that shining city on a hill that Ronald Reagan talked about. Because right now, if we're the shining city, we need to turn up the light.
Okay. Val Demings, Rodney Davis, thank you both so much for accompanying us through this program, looking at President Trump's first year back in office. Great to have you both with us. And thank you as well for watching us here on BBC News. World News is coming up next with Caitriona.
Yeah, do stay tuned for that. Lots more still to come. Take care.
Hello, thanks for joining me. The Aurora might be back tonight, but